meeting is being recorded.
Testing. Hi, Amanda. We're just getting set up right now. This is Shannon from the RDOS. I'm one of the planners here. I'm just having some technical difficulties with my camera, and we might just go without the camera today. But I do want to let you know that we are here. And
Yeah,
we'll
no
let
worries.
you know
I can
when we're getting
also,
started.
I'm fine having my camera off as well.
All right, well, I'm just going to quickly run to the back, but we'll just keep welcoming our members in as they come.
Sounds great.
I'll be right back. There.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Really? Okay.
I'll be right
Okay. Here. Hi, I'm Don Glenn. Brad Ellis, I'm that many, please. I don't think so. Go fight. You were on this last year? Sure, Ray. I was, yeah. I'm not gonna renew. Yeah. I was gonna let it go, have to renew every 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
Gonna let it go 2 years ago. Daughter-in-law. And I got visitor now. Grandpa,
So you had to come and help, right?
so I got a license for that, plus I'm working with some more. So, yeah, we got some development programs.
I should finish a few projects that get going.
Uh, well, $75. Can't be. Cheers. Saw this.
Nice to keep involved and
Yeah,
see what's happening in your community.
yeah.
I thought, January is pretty hot. We didn't get a lot of cold, a lot of snow, so I'm hoping it's done, but I know it was really cold. I know this valley's got hit hard with a lot of, grape industry. So, Summerland did their bud, they do their bud counts every year. When they did it on the Black Sage, and said, that hurts. It's so bad up here, I'm mad at it. It's the ones closer to the water. Yep, yeah.
And it's reasonably optimistic.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just a key.
Hi, Director Gettins. We're just getting set up in here. Just sorting out some of the technical aspects right now. I am uncertain if I will get my camera working to see all of us in the room, unfortunately. But I'm just waiting on Chris as he's got the orientation as well that he's going to do after this first application. Hi, Director Gettins. The meeting hasn't started just yet. We're just sorting out some technical issues on our side here. But it looks like we've got most of the members here in the room or online already.
Okay.
Director Gettins, were you able to hear that? Okay, how about now?
Jenny, she was the youngest sister. Carol, Mary, Dana.
If Amanda or Joe could confirm whether they can hear anything that's coming through, that would be great.
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And I know we've got a call-in user as well, so I just want to double check who that is on the line.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Bella Madero.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Bella. So I think one of the big things that is different for this meeting is that when you speak, you'll have to click. It's just a little button on the mic here, just to make sure that the video recording system is picking you up. And so anyone online can hear what you're saying. So
You have to hold it or
just click it. Yes, exactly. I'm not sure if the director is able to hear us now. Perfect. Yeah, I'm not sure what else we can do with the camera setup, Chris. Mhm. I think for now, I'll just go ahead and pull up the agenda so we have something we can reference here.
All right, turn it over to you guys. Still the chair?
Am I still the chair? I guess I could be.
Yeah.
Here. And we'll make sure the mics are just picking up what we're saying.
Want to go down to the first item on the agenda?
Yep.
I guess we'll call the meeting to order at 12:11. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the February 28th, 2022?
So moved.
Thank you. Delegations. Development variance permit. There's somebody that was going to speak on that.
And we do have the applicant on the line.
Hello, can you hear us? Medarius?
So I do see that Bella is on the line. And I also see that they're signed in via WebEx as well. So you'll just have to unmute yourself to speak.
Oh. You're going to say something?
I think I can speak to it a little bit. It's a variance. This is for a pool.
So do you want to just try it?
Sorry. Yeah, so oh, wow. So the application is for a variance for a pool up on Sandstone Drive, which is part of the Westwood Strata. To my knowledge, they've had and I think you should have record of this because it was brought forward at your last meeting. I can't recall the date on it, but that was a board meeting and I believe they did a presentation. And the geological or the survey or the assessment was provided. And it was supported by the geological engineer that it said that it wasn't going to be an issue. As far as I know, at the meeting, it was very close to being passed. I think everybody at the board meeting supported it, with the exception of Director Gettens, who wanted to bring it forward to this committee and make sure that this committee was in support of it.
Thank you. Do you have anything to say about this, Shannon?
I do just have a brief presentation if you'd like me to go over the file.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is a development variance permit application for the property at 1947 Sandstone Drive. And as mentioned, this was seen by the board at their January 19th, 2023 meeting and was deferred to the APC for their consideration. So the zoning of the property is low density residential West Bench, and the official community plan designation that applies to the property is low density residential. The parcel is fairly small in nature. It's 1,187 square meters in size and currently contains a single detached dwelling. With respect to the zoning that applies to the property, it is specified within the zoning bylaw that the use of land for a swimming pool is prohibited for properties within the West Bench, being the zones West Bench small holdings and the West Bench low density residential zones. Further to that, as it relates to the zoning that applies to this property, the maximum parcel coverage is set out to be 30%. And if the applicant were to construct this pool, it would bring that right over the edge there to 31.94%. And then just with respect to the Greater West Bench geotechnical review that was completed back in 2021, this did speak to swimming pools as well as broken pipes and other ornamental pools and the risk that those pose to subsurface erosion and sinkhole development. So as it relates to swimming pools in particular, there was a recommendation brought forward, or it was indicated in the report that the construction of swimming pools do have the potential to impact slope stability as well as sinkhole development, just due to the introduction of water to soils through leaks, as well as overland draining. So as mentioned for this proposal, it is to vary section 6.10.5 of the zoning bylaw to essentially lift that restriction for this specific property to allow for the construction of a swimming pool, as well as to increase the maximum parcel coverage from 30% to 31.94% to facilitate that construction as well. And as mentioned, the applicant did provide a letter that was signed by professional licensee engineering that does confirm that the proposed pool can be safely constructed and would not increase the hazard risk for the subject or the surrounding area. And in our review of the parcel coverage request, we do see that that's fairly minor in nature and would not have a negative impact on the surrounding properties or result in the overdevelopment of this particular site. So with that in mind, we did recommend to the Regional District Board that this application be approved. And that's it for me, so thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I personally don't see any issues with it. The geotech in that area, as I think we mostly all know, was ex-gravel pit. It is not like the rest of the West Bench below us that's mostly clay, which would cause an issue. But I think where this location is, plus we have pools already in that area in the strata. Because of the geotech in that area, I do not see a problem with it.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I do see that the director has her hand up.
Riley, go ahead.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, just checking in. Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks. So I'm traveling, unfortunately, today, so I apologize for the delay and for not being there in person. The reason I asked us to go to the APC is because it was put through what's called a consent agenda at the board meeting. So the consent agenda is when the staff can put something forward that they think is a minor variance, and that probably relates a lot to the extra land use in the backyard. But the reason why I wanted the APC to have a chance to talk about this is because we just did recently prohibit swimming pools in West Bench, recognizing that there are different types of land and dirt, and just like what the applicant has said, that it is different across where they are compared to where lower West Bench is, and the risk therefore is different. And the geotech is also, they've got the geotech report there too. So my understanding and why I wanted the APC to review this is, one, to know that we did prohibit pools. I'm not in agreement that pools should go through the consent agenda without having the board review that, just because otherwise why are we prohibiting pools at West Bench at all? And then also just allowing the APC an opportunity to discuss this because, again, I just want to reinforce that the applicant's correct. There are different types of land around the West Bench that can handle different types of risks, but there is a cumulative effect that we have to pay attention to as well, and that's all addressed in that geotech report. So that's why it's come to the APC, and I just wanted to clarify that. So this is really just to hear from the APC's thoughts on it, and just to get a confirmation that these types of applications won't go through consent. I think it's important that the APC is aware of the applications and how many applications we get for pools when they've just been prohibited. So I won't, normally I don't actually speak too much at the APCs, but I just wanted to clarify that, and I just wanted to clarify with the APC why I brought it to this group.
Thank you, Riley. Do we have any other discussion? Personally, I think I agree with you. I think that there doesn't seem to be that much of an issue. If they did a geotech study, they said it was safe, and there are other pools in that area. And I don't think that variance is that big of a deal. But my vote would be for yes. Gary? You have no problem?
I would support it.
You would support it? I think it's unanimous. We would support the application. Are there other members online?
Yes, we do have Amanda Dean online as
Oh,
well.
Amanda, would you like to talk about this?
I would support it as well. I live out in the Falder Rural Summerland area, so I don't think it affects, I don't know enough about the West Bench area. If the engineers say it's good to go, then it sounds like it's a good plan.
Thank you, Amanda. And oh, yes.
My name is Lorna. Is that going forward, maybe we need a refinement to ask certain things like this? Because I think this is going to be an issue that someone's going to point to and say, well, gee, 4 months after you pass the legislation or pass the information, now you're letting someone go ahead. And I personally don't have a problem with it. I don't think it would ever be an issue, but someone else is going to come. And so maybe there needs to be put forward to whatever committee or whatever group is that we need to refine the items that you would need to meet, like a geotech or an engineering or, maybe a restriction on the type of pool. Is this a fiberglass pool? Is it a vinyl liner? That type of thing. But I know it doesn't really relevant to this, but I just thought I'd bring it up because it's the right time to bring up that point.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that?
Just Mike Allen, in terms of that, I think that the engineering report was a broad brush stroke over Area F. I think that the bylaw reflected that report. I think it really begs the question because I have a pool in my backyard, and if you saw, and I could provide pictures of the aggregate and the boulders, huge boulders, and some bedrock where I had to put in a septic field as well. That landscape, it is so solid in there as a result of it being a gravel, sand and gravel pit. And just further to that, down the street from us on Sandstone Drive, the two lots facing southbound, they're putting in a vineyard, and they had a D9 in there last summer. And the amount of boulder and aggregate that they had to move out of there further substantiated in my mind that area on that bench is very solid, very solid. So in terms of this, I don't think there's going to be a risk. I think I think it does beg the question that, that the report should, maybe be examined a little bit further in terms of where should there be a line in terms of the geology for this type of thing? Because there is a bylaw, and the bylaw is basically saying one thing. And I think if the bylaw is in place, we have to stand behind the bylaw. But I think that the homework maybe wasn't done further back up the hill to go, oh, up to this point, we're okay. Going further east and down the hill, we're not okay, by evidence of the silty makeup of the soil and so on. So anyway, I just throw that out there. Lorna, I think you have a good point. That's it.
I agree with that totally. Our particular area is very much different than as Mike was saying, the eastern portion of the West Bench. I was involved in the development of this area originally, and I can tell you it was a gravel pit, and it could be again very easily because there is enough. All you have to do is go up there and try to dig a fence post. It's, forget it. Having said that, I think that what Lauren is saying, I agree that there should be a precedent set if somebody is applying for a pool on the West Bench, particularly if somebody is applying for a pool in the eastern portion of the West Bench. And I think that a geotech, environmental, et cetera, I think the regional district should be very, the report should be very in detail, whether it's for or against, but I think that this sort of sets a precedent. This person has gone out and got a geotech and done his due diligence. But I think if more pools are coming, our area, that area that we're dealing with should be probably in most cases okay. But I would be very concerned with the West Bench area to the east.
Thank you. Is there not, when people apply for anything, it doesn't matter what it is there not a process in place that says if there's a bylaw against it, you can apply for a variance?
Yes. Yeah. So I appreciate everybody's comments. I think in the agenda, hopefully it says we have an orientation after this. So some of these things that we're talking about here, I'm actually going to touch on with some of the slides for the orientation. But I think it's a misperception in planning that when a bylaw prohibits something, it prohibits it. It doesn't really, right? I mean, when you adopt one of these zoning bylaws, and I'll touch on this later, property owners have a right to apply to have the board reconsider the restrictions that are on their property, and that the board has to consider those applications. You can't stop them from coming forward, right? So just because the bylaw prohibits somebody from building within a setback or building above a certain height doesn't mean it's never going to happen. It just means that, to have an exception to that, you have to get discretionary board approval, which usually is either a permit or an amendment by law, depending on the nature of the request that's being made. But I've got it all covered here. So we'll get to that in a few minutes.
I think that's what I was getting at, is even though, like you say, there are areas that you can't have it, there is a mechanism in place where you can apply for that. And it just matters what if you go for amendment, then you have to have a geotechnical study or a knowledge or whatever you need, you have to do. So I think that's already in place. So anyway, that's all I have to say on that. Yep. It's like anything, you can fight City Hall for anything. So I believe we were all in favor of this.
Yep. I think so.
So I think we're going to say we would forward that we would approve. And I think you, Chris, you have some
Yeah,
things
just
to do next. Go ahead.
just confirm so we get our minutes right here for your next meeting. So the motion that was passed was to support like that the APC is recommending to the RDOS board that the development application be approved. Yeah,
That is correct.
okay.
So we should put.
If we need a motion, I'll move it.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Yeah.
Second, all in favor?
Mike seconds.
All were in favor. Okay, Chris.
I'm just going to get my jump drive. What's
I'll grab that one.
okay. It's up to you. Actually, just make sure I get this screen sharing done. Okay, great. Okay, so for the benefit of everybody who's online, my presentation is basically just an orientation for the APC because this is, of course, your first meeting of the new term, and some of you are new to the APC, and you know it's also good to have a bit of a refresher. So you're more than welcome to stay and listen to the discussion, but don't feel you have to. And I appreciate time might be tight. I probably have more slides than I need here. And ideally, I probably should have done this orientation before your first item. But of course, we generally structure the agenda, you know, when it's RDOS stuff, it usually follows last, just so applicants don't have to wait through all this other stuff before we get consideration from the APC on their application. So having said that, I do have a lot of slides, but I'm hopeful that some of them can be dispatched pretty quickly. And usually I take questions at the end of a presentation, but for this one, I'm happy to be interrupted as we go along, because I don't want you to, you know, as you'll see, there's different sections to the presentation. And so I don't want you to have to wait to the end to ask me about, you know, something, say, with the Local Government Act or our bylaws or amendments. So just feel free to turn on your mic and interject as need be. So there's about 5 different sections I'm going to cover off today. And I tried to tailor this in a way that would be relevant to the APCs and explain why it is that you see some of the things that the board is sending your way. So with that, I'll start off just with a kind of a legislation statutory background. And I think I have piles here for your envelopes here for each of you in relation to codes of conduct and just other paperwork related to this term. So I'll pass these out at the end. So just for everybody's benefit, you know, of course, there's a lot of different services that the regional district provides to the electoral areas. But for planning, which is primarily what you're going to be seeing in terms of land use applications, almost everything we do is set out by the provincial government through the legal framework, otherwise known as the Local Government Act. And it's the act that gives us the authority to implement bylaws, to issue permits, to set up procedures and processes, et cetera. And so without that authority, we basically can't do it, at least in terms of land use planning. And so the 3 main ones that planning usually deals with in a local government context are regional growth strategies. Then planning and land use is your typical official community plan, zoning bylaw, permit structure, et cetera, and then heritage conservation. For the purposes of the APC meeting, it's highly unusual that you would see anything in relation to a regional growth strategy, primarily because they're amended very rarely. I think it's a 5-year cycle that we review them on. And I'll get to this in subsequent slides as well. And RGS is kind of a joint bylaw between us and the member municipalities. Heritage conservation, we don't really provide that service. I mean, we have in the past, but not in the sense that we're issuing permits for heritage conservation or trying to protect structures. It's more in terms of collecting tax dollars and funneling that through to different conservation groups that, say, for instance, in the rural Oliver, protect the the Fairview Heritage Town Site. So again, there's not really that much that comes out of heritage that triggers APC review. It's the Part 14 land use management stuff that's pretty much your bread and butter as a commission. So again, and this kind of speaks to what we were just discussing at the end of that previous permit discussion. So again, keeping in mind, because everything we do is set out by the Local Government Act, it's the act that says that as soon as a local government, whether it's municipalities such as Penticton here or the regional district, adopts an OCDP or zoning bylaw, there's certain things that it must do, that there's no options around that. So having adopted one of these bylaws, you have to set out procedures for how a property owner can come forward to amend that or ask the board to amend that bylaw. Similarly, if they have an issue that requires a permit, you have to set out, how it is that they can come forward and obtain a permit. And it also sets out, which we were just talking about, that when somebody submits an application, the regional district must consider it. So staff have no authority to say, and using the discussion we just had, that yes, the board has just passed a prohibition on pools, so therefore you can't submit this application. It doesn't work that way. Even though we have a prohibition on pools, if somebody wants the board to reconsider that and they put an application in, we have to accept it and we have to process it. And depending on what type of application it is, part of that processing procedure might be, or it might include sending it to the APC for comment, right? So even though you might wonder why you're seeing some of these applications, if they've been submitted and you're part of the process, you have to see it, right? So you may not like it and you don't have to support it, but you still have to consider it sometimes. And the other thing the Act sets out, this isn't a must, it's a may, but all of our electoral areas save, I think, two or three, the board has appointed advisory planning commissions for. So you're one of about 5 or 6 APCs in the valley, right? So rural Oliver has one, OK Falls, the Cleveland Apex, St. Andrews area, obviously the West Bench and Armada. And I believe the last one is the rural Princeton, so Missoula, Eastgate area has an APC. Now, I've put this slide on just to emphasize the degree to which the province can kind of change the goalposts on us. And so even though, and again, for the APCs, we might have processes in place that you're familiar with, on occasion, these will change. And sometimes the change is related to provincial amendments to the Act. And so right now, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in terms of amendments to the LGA are in relation to what the province has called its development process review, development approvals process review. And so the current government, when it was elected in 2017, identified possibly local government approval processes were slowing up approval of new housing and therefore the housing market. And that was really related to affordability and accessibility issues. And so they've been undertaking a review of the Act and making a number of changes that local governments can either take up or not take up. And so, out of interest here, the board has taken this particular one up, the delegation of DVPs. So staff now have the ability, if a DVP is, for benefit of everybody's new here, development variance permit, which is what you were just looking at. If it's deemed to be minor, staff can issue those without board approval. Because of challenges in the local media industry and the ability to get ads out, they've changed our ability to do notifications, so no longer newspapers, and then public hearing requirements, which we haven't taken up. So, when the province makes these changes, sometimes it might influence how and what you're seeing as well. It's not always the RDOS doing it. That's the point I wanted to make. So moving on now to the bylaws, and these are probably the ones that you're going to be seeing applications for most frequently. So our RGS, well, I say RGS, but probably not, official community plan, zoning, and I put subdivision servicing bylaws on here just more for context, but you're unlikely to see those. So I'll just get into this. So this is the basic hierarchy of our bylaws and how they work. And you can see at the top is the regional growth strategy. And so that's the bylaw where the regional district, Oliver, Soyuz, Summerland, and Penticton have all agreed to work together to mutual outcomes. And again, because of the legislation and how it's written, any local government that's party to an RGS bylaw, everything it does has to be consistent with that strategy. Similarly, the Act says the same thing about efficient community plans. Having adopted an efficient community plan, everything the local government does has to be consistent with that OCP. And the OCP is different than zoning. An efficient community plan is just a collection of policies and guidelines. It's not as regulatory as a zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is the one that sets out building envelopes and parcel sizes for subdivision and whatnot. And then at the very bottom, we have the subdivision servicing and the building bylaw. So those are two separate bylaws. One deals with building permits and one deals with design standards and some other aspects of subdivision. And those bylaws, there's not really a discretionary role for either the board or the APCs on, if there's an issue with subdivision or building and change is required, usually that change has to happen with some of the higher up bylaws. So depending on the nature of it, it could be a zoning change only, or it might require a change to your efficient community plan as well. It's unlikely it would affect RGS. The RGS is too high level. So again, just some background context here for the APC's benefit. So there is an RGS for the RDOS. It only applies to the Okanagan, and of course that then involves the District of Summerland and Electoral Area F. There's 7 main parts to the RGS. I won't spend too much time on these, but you can see them here on the left. Really the one that we use in the planning department the most is the housing and development, and that's primarily in relation to rural growth areas and primary growth areas in Electoral Area F. There is no primary growth area. The only rural growth area is Greta, but that's being reviewed at the moment. It may or may not continue as a growth area. West Bench has been identified as a potential growth area in future, but that's subject to servicing being provided in the form of stormwater and sewer. So even though we're going through a review of the RGS right now, there is no stormwater and sewer for the West Bench. So now is not the time to consider it for growth area status. And then, of course, your big neighbor is Summerland, and it is a primary growth area, which basically means it's where we want to see the majority of growth and development happen. It's got the services in terms of water and sewer, employment base, services, retail, health, etc. So it's a primary destination for this particular part of the RD. So I think I've touched on some of these key points for the RGS already. All bylaws have to be consistent with it. Amending an RGS requires the consent of all parties. So it's not just something that the RDOS can do unilaterally. It has to be supported by Penticton, Summerland, Oliver, and Osoyoos. I've touched on Greta being reviewed, and I've also touched on West Bench being considered at some future point subject to servicing. Now, moving on to your official community plan now. Yep.
Chris, is there, just in the West Bench, is there any kind of an outlook in terms of water servicing going up there, up in that area? And when I talk about water servicing, I'm talking about, so as you know, we've got the system, the privately owned system that I think RDOS just recently has acquired. But that's not meeting the health standards at this juncture. A little bit off topic, but I'm just curious, is there any outlook on that or?
Not that I'm aware of, but
Fair enough.
yeah, I mean, in the context of the RGS though, like, at least from planning's perspective, when you have areas that have been designated as rural growth area, and the only primary growth area that's in an electoral area is Okanagan Falls, I mean, those really should be the focus of your funding for if there's going to be an expansion or an extension of a water or sewer system. Of course, recognizing that there's a lot of areas like the West Bench, which currently aren't designated as primary or rural, but there are existing water, it's primarily water systems. I know Heritage Hills has a sewer system as well. Apex does as well, but that's run by the resort. I mean, certainly improvements to those systems can be undertaken, but in terms of expanding them, I guess it would depend on what the nature of the expansion is and why, right? So recognizing that West Bench is, to be reviewed as a future potential growth area subject to X, Y, and Z, but those aren't in place yet. Well, if the request is to extend a water system, well, where is that extension to and why? Is it just to capture existing areas, or is it to facilitate growth somewhere else? So that, that could come into play with the RGS, but yeah, I don't really have any specifics on that per se. Okay, so coming back to the OCP, so Area F had its OCP reviewed between 2016 and 2018. So it's actually one of our newer ones. I think the only other one that we've adopted since is for the rural Soyuz area. But we are working on rural Naramata now. And so the OCP, again, the dot points that I have listed here are basic requirements that the province has specified we have to address in any of our OCPs. So you have to show that there's existing land capable of meeting a 5-year growth potential for residential development. You have to identify and know where all of your public utilities are, gravel resources. If you're aware of restrictions related to the environment or hazardous areas, the OCP has to speak to those, and any possible future infrastructure locations. So really like just basic stuff around development, right? You know, do you have the land? Can it be serviced? Is it at risk from hazard or the environment? And how do you propose to service it? Now, the tricky thing I've found over the years with regional district OCPs versus municipal ones is that, you know, a municipal OCP covers the entire area of the municipality, whereas a regional district OCP tends to only cover part of the area. And, you know, as a regional district, obviously, there's going to be regional policies. And so there's this balancing act that has to occur with the electoral area OCPs, and that the board has set regional direction on certain matters, but then we also recognize that these OCPs are being implemented for a particular area, and there's going to be local policies specific to that area that may not be applicable elsewhere. And it can certainly be a challenge. So what I've listed here in the dot points are just some of those regional ones. So we do have a regional position on climate action. We, you know, the environment doesn't reflect electoral area boundaries. It's regional, and so our policies are regional. Our approach to hazard lands, again, that's a regional issue. Growth management, because of the RGS, we have to be consistent in where we're focusing growth. So again, that's a regional issue. And with transportation, obviously the road network goes up and down the valley. And so generally when it comes to Highway 97 or Highway 3 or whatnot, we have regional positions on that. That said, I think the Area FOCP also does have specific sections for local area policies for Prairie Valley, Meadow Valley, Falder, obviously the West Bench, and then also Greta Ranch, north from the campground up to the border with Peachland. So that's just kind of, you know, there's so much information in these documents. It's hard sometimes to give a broad overview of them, but that's kind of your OCP in a nutshell. Key points. So I've kind of focused here on some of the action items because, as I mentioned, Area F is one of the newer OCPs. So after its adoption in 2018, we started working on some of the recommendations that were contained with it. And obviously the big one, again, as per your item on the agenda today, was the West Bench Geotech review. For those familiar with the West Bench, we had the Clone-Leonoff report, which was the last geotech report done. And that was completed, I believe, in 1991. And it contained a number of recommendations, particularly in relation to subdivision and development. And I think because of Clone-Leonoff, that's one of the reasons I don't believe there's been a subdivision in the West Bench since about the early 1990s. Clone-Leonoff, for interest, also did have a recommendation very specific saying to prohibit pools in the West Bench. The board didn't take that up at the time, so pools were able to continue after 1991. But of course, when the more recent West Bench review was completed 2 years ago, or I guess technically a year and a half ago, and it highlighted some of the concerns with, you know, big pools or basins of water, we put the question to the board. I mean, we've had previous direction. That direction has been renewed with the most recent report. How do you want to proceed? Different ways of doing it. I think the report, the 2021 report, recommended we could look at covenants or development permits or zoning restrictions. And at the end of the day, we felt that the zoning restrictions were the most effective. And also, and it sounds weird to say this in relation to zoning bylaws, also provided more flexibility than some of the other options, particularly development permits. So, you know, that's some of the background context and where that pool prohibition came from. The other one, which you may be familiar with, especially if you live in the West Bench, is the soil removal and deposition bylaw. So again, the concern there is that the removal of soil or soils being brought in from offsite can change the grading, not the packing, but compacting, of the soil, change water flows, potentially create hazards for adjacent properties. So we're in the middle of completing that bylaw. I think we have first reading tentatively scheduled for this coming board meeting on Thursday. And then the third point, which I think spoke to some of the questions that came up during the discussion just now in the pool, was that there was a recommendation that we improve our geotech report requirements. So at the moment, there's a board policy that I think was implemented after Clone Leonoff came down in 1991 and hasn't really changed very much since then. But all it says is that for building permits in the West Bench, a geotech report must be submitted. Well, as you can imagine, I mean, it's professional reliance. We're not giving much direction. And so it kind of runs the gamut. I mean, you can get geotech reports that are 5 pages up to 50 pages. And it's a struggle for us at a staff level to understand, which one's adequate. Are they both adequate? How can one be so concise and the other one more detailed? Are they looking at the same things? Because we're not really providing any direction. And so as soon as soil bylaws is completed, our next step then is to start working on these report requirements for the geotechs and to try to give them some goalposts or standards, based on the West Bench review from 2021, and maybe even some of the Clone Leonoff stuff. Okay, so these are what these reports have said. Here's some basic information that we need to see in geotech reports. And it may be further to the discussion you just had that if the geotech report is being prepared in relation to something that's going to be water related, if you want to put it that way, whether it's the ornamental ponds or a pool or a water feature or hard surfacing of a property that's going to create increased stormwater runoff, what do we need to see covered in this report to address those concerns, right? At the moment, we don't have that. So this particular pool that's come forward today is just, pure professional reliance. We're trusting that the engineer that has prepared that report has covered off everything that we need to see. And I think Shannon highlighted as part of the discussion that they did make that statement that they felt the pool could be adequately developed without adversely or negatively impacting surrounding properties. I will say though that, I appreciate your input on that pool proposal, but, and that the upper part of the West Bench is different geotechnically than the lower part. But I guess for us at a staff level, we do have concerns that we don't know where water is going, right? Like when water comes off of that upper part of the West Bench, where is it going? And how's it getting down to the lake or wherever else it is? And is it flowing through that lower part? Is that contributing to sloughing or sinkholes or whatnot? We have no idea, right? So that's kind of what we want to try to address with the geotech report requirements. If you're going to be putting in additional pools in a strata or somewhere else at the top end, and say there is a cataclysmic failure of that pool, well, where's that water going and what's the likelihood of it contributing to geotech issues down below, right? We don't know. The other project, and I'll touch on this a little bit later too, just watching my time here, I'm way behind, but we are also working on a Falder zone review. And so the Falder zone review, it wasn't a specific direction in the OCP per se, but we recognized after the adoption of the OCP that the existing policy statements related to that area, Meadow Valley, Prairie Valley, Falder itself, may not have been providing the best guidance in relation to development proposals, because we did have a number of rezonings come in to facilitate subdivision, but we are aware, because we have the Falder water system, that aquifer can be under stress. There seem to be wet years and dry years. I think more dry years than wet. And if we continue to allow subdivision in this area to happen, what does that mean? So the Falder zone review was initiated in 2021. In 2022, the board funded the Meadow Valley Aquifer, which has come back and shown us that there are some critical areas, particularly north of Falder and in the Falder water service area itself, that need to be addressed. And so we're in the process of working on that in terms of possible amendments to the OCP. I believe the APC last term might have seen the initial draft of the new policies and regulations. But now with the Meadow Valley Aquifer and having to update the policies to reflect that, it may be that you see it again at a forthcoming meeting as we move forward with that this year. Okay, so I've touched on this already a few times. I won't spend too much time on it, but because we have these bylaws, we have to have processes in place for people to seek exceptions. And so that's what our procedures bylaw is. And then the other picture here is just a cover shot of the APC bylaw. So these are two of the, I guess, processes that we rely on to help with that. So Switching gears now into the zoning bylaw. So again, further kind of to what you just saw with your first item on your agenda today. You know, typical zoning bylaws, uses, and what I would consider building envelopes, right? So, you know, how many units can you put on a parcel? How big can that parcel be? What are the setbacks? What's the height? What's the parcel coverage? And that sets out basically what development is going to look like on that parcel. Now that doesn't always work for people. And so they will come in and, as we've discussed, seek exceptions or seek board approval to do something different. And so there's basically two paths, without oversimplifying it too much, that those requests can go. And so if it's a request to change a use, right? So if you're in the West Bench, just because that seems to be the topic today, the zoning up in the West Bench allows for one principal dwelling, and that's it. If you wanted to put two principal dwellings, well, that would be a change of use and a change of density. So you'd have to go the amendment bylaw process. But if it was a matter of just going to 11 meters in height for your house in the West Bench, well, that would be a variation to the zoning, which would be we could do through a permit. We also do have, I've got here the reference to a temporary use permit. I don't think we've seen those too much in the West Bench. We use them generally for vacation rentals as our way to regulate them in the RD, and we are actually undertaking a review of vacation rentals, at least tentatively for 2023. But I'm just drawing a blank. I can't think of any off the top of my head in the West Bench or Area F per se.
Sorry, Chris, there was one. I thought that was on the agenda. Is that is a development variance permit application?
Yeah, that's the development variance, but the temporary use permit, it's a permit, but it actually deals with the use. And so you don't have to do an amendment bylaw. But the caveat with the temporary use permit is it can only be up to 3 years, and there's no grandfathering. So as soon as the permit expires, the use has to end. When you change a use by bylaw and then change the bylaw again, you potentially get grandfathering, but that doesn't apply with a permit. But anyway, I'll keep moving here because I see the time. So I thought this was going to be a trick question, but I realized that the previous slide kind of gives it away, but I'll ask it anyway. So we have somebody who wants to put an accessory dwelling unit on their property, and the bylaw currently sets it out as 125 square meters. But they want to go to 130 square meters to accommodate a third bedroom. So do they need to apply for a DVP or a rezoning? Well, obviously it's a rezoning because of the previous slide, but I'll explain it in the sense that I think it's actually both triggering use and density. Because of the way our bylaws are written, an accessory dwelling, anything more than 125 square meters is no longer considered an accessory dwelling. It's now a principal dwelling. So anybody who wanted to go to 130 needs to amend the bylaw to allow for a second principal dwelling unit. And as soon as you have to do that, then we're into a density issue because the bylaw only allows one principal, but now you want to have two. So that puts it into the realm of an amendment bylaw. So I tried to chart out in something that would fit on a PowerPoint slide our process for how an application proceeds. And so you can see here the APC step is highlighted in the lighter blue. So as a group, your input happens at what I would consider in the first part of the application process. So you can see here that the application comes into the RDOS, staff take it in, we do a quick assessment, make sure it's a complete application. And we start posting information onto our webpage and whatnot, which I'll get to in a subsequent slide here as well. We'll send it out to agencies for comment, and then we will schedule a public information meeting. And because of the way our procedures bylaw is written, every rezoning application has to be considered by an APC for that applicable electoral area. So you will always see a rezoning application that comes in. There's not a lot of them in Area F, but they come in maybe once or twice a year. And so I'll just quickly go through these other steps here. So once we have the consultation process complete, we take all the information up to the board and it considers first and second reading. And so at that point, the board has the option of killing an application, saying, no, we don't support this proposal, and denying the request to amend the bylaws, or it can give first and second reading, in which case it proceeds to public hearing, followed by third reading. Third reading is another point at which a bylaw, a board can choose to deny it. And if they supported a third, then we sometimes have to get MOT approval. The trigger there is if a property is within 800 meters of Highway 97 or Highway 3. And once we have ministry approval, it comes back for formal adoption. Now, the board also has the option after a public hearing to defer consideration and ask or suggest to an applicant that they change their application. An applicant's not obligated to. They can say, no, this is what I'm asking for. I want you to consider it as is, or they can amend it. And if they do choose to amend it, depending on the scope of the amendment, it's quite likely that a public hearing is going to be required. And if it's substantially different, there's always the possibility it comes back to the APC, right? Because your recommendation that you made originally may no longer be applicable to the amended proposal, right? So I would suspect as a group, you don't want, if it's a positive or a negative recommendation for something that's substantially changed, for that to be your position. So it may be there's the odd case where you're asked to look at something a second time, right? Again, it doesn't happen often, but it is a possibility. So I just wanted to flag that. Now, this comes up quite frequently in terms of what is the role of the APC. And I know there's differing views on it, but I think at the moment, this is basically the structure. So what the board is asking you to do as an advisory planning commission is to provide it your input. So you can see here, and again, it was hard to get a good diagram to show how all these things interrelate, but when we receive the application and send it out for consultation, what we're doing is obviously the board is hearing from the applicant. So the applicant is asking them to say, hey, look at my idea. I think this is great. I hope you think it's great. So they're getting that perspective. They're getting staff's perspective in terms of us interpreting the bylaws and saying, well, here's your policies. Here's what you said about this type of development. Either we think is consistent or not. They're getting agency comments from, say, Agricultural Land Commission or Interior Health or Ministry of Transportation, where in those agencies are saying, well, here's our mandate and here's what we're supposed to do and here's how we think this proposal relates to that. Either we think it's consistent or not. So, sometimes the Land Commission will come back and say that this is not a suitable agricultural use and, shouldn't be supported. Ministry might raise concerns Ministry of Transportation might raise concerns that developments can have an adverse impact on the highway network. And, very rarely will they say no to it, but that, certain upgrades or other things need to be done in order to facilitate this. Other component that they get input on is the public. And usually for permits or rezonings, the public that we hear from are those immediately around or in close proximity to the applicant's property, right? So they might be concerned about loss of views, loss of property value, or they're supporting the development because they want to do the exact same thing at some future point when the bylaw currently doesn't allow for it. And so where the APC comes in is, and this is, I think, where sometimes the confusion occurs, is the APC is not here to hear from the public and is not here to offer the board its views on what the public is saying, or agencies for that matter. The APC is here to give that broader objective community input, right? You're obviously not the applicant and you're obviously not the people immediately around the applicant. You are the broader Area F representative group, right? And so that's the perspective that you bring to the table. So they're hearing from the applicant, they're hearing from the people immediately adjacent to the applicant, they've got staff's input, agency, and then you're that broader review, right? So in terms of your meetings, and so I'm switching gears here a bit, but and there's been some changes this year from last year for those of you, as you've probably seen the memo, and why we're meeting during the day now as opposed to at night. But for meetings, so staff here at the RDOS, we will take care of a lot of the organizing of your meeting in terms of setting the agenda, helping to schedule the venues, notifying on our website, potentially also putting out information about the meetings on our Voyant Alert, which is our mass notification systems that people have subscribed to either get texts, emails, or voicemails about things going on within the regional district. What we won't do, though, and again, this gets back to that previous slide, is we will not directly notify people, like we always refer to as adjacents, the people who live immediately around the property under application. So yes, your meetings are public. They're open to the public. Anybody can attend. The APC is basically, you can't close your meeting and go in camera. But but we're not doing that mass like direct notification to neighbors. And they're not really meant to speak at APC meetings either. So you will probably get requests on occasion from, the neighbor next door who's really concerned that something they, and it seems to be when they're opposed to it, is going to go forward and they're trying to find ways to stop it, who may approach you to speak as a delegation. But again, that's not really your role because we're not notifying your meetings as that type of venue, right? If we were to start notifying your meetings that way, it would be a totally different ballgame. And now we're into situations where we have to try to manage how those people are coming in and presenting to you, but we're not doing that. And so when you get these requests, I mean, you're not really supposed to be indulging. For people who are that concerned about a proposal, their venue is to write in and speak either at the public hearing or get their letters to the board, and the board will make that decision as to how much weight or merit to give to the input that they're hearing, which is kind of my last stop point here. So yeah, just a reminder that, there are other venues or mechanisms for people to get comments to the board, and it's not through the APCs. And so don't feel pressure to take that on. So yeah, another consideration, and I'm putting this forward in the context of our rezonings, but it probably is equally applicable to permits, which I'll touch on later. And sometimes we'll get referrals that we receive as well, and that's to put forward like a really, I don't want to say concise, but a recommendation that really captures what it is that you're wanting to say to the board, because it's not an easy thing sometimes. And, I've got some examples here, which if you did the last orientation, you'll probably recognize, but there's certainly room for gray or confusion with a poorly crafted recommendation. So I've put some don'ts up, and these are actual recommendations that have come in from the APCs in the past. And so I'll just read them off here. So for the first one, and then we can talk about, what some of the challenges are with these recommendations. But with this first one, the APC has recommended to the board that the DVP be approved with the condition that the applicant seeks approval of, well, they said his, because I suspect it was a fellow in front of them, neighbors regarding the proposed principal dwelling with attached garage. So I can't recall the specifics here. It was probably a setback issue. But the challenge with this recommendation is it's completely invalid. It doesn't matter what the neighbor, it's basically imposing a third-party condition onto the applicant, which they may or may never get, because that neighbor now has been given a very big hammer, which they can try to extract concessions or anything else from their property owner. Again, that's not what the applicant is asking. The applicant is put to the board, this is what I want to do. These are the variances I need. Do you support me? Do you not support me? And what the neighbors say, well, okay, that can be a consideration for the board, but you can never, I guess you could say it's an invalid recommendation. And if the board was to take that up, it's also an unlawful delegation of the board's authority. The board has the authority to make that decision on the variance, not the neighbor. So you got to be really careful about, how you build that kind of stuff in. The second one, the APC recommends to the board that the application be approved with the following conditions, and that the rezoning is for the sole use of the applicant to construct phase 2 of the housing project. Well, again, that's not valid, right? So when you're looking at a development or a proposed use, you have to look at it on the merits of what is before you, right? Does this oversized house make sense? Or does this new use, I'm thinking of another area, West Bench example, there is that old corner store where somebody wanted to put in a secondhand shop, right? Don't look at the applicant and who's putting in the shop. Is the secondhand retail outlet appropriate at that location? It shouldn't matter who is running it or who the applicant is. So if you have concerns about the use, then say no to it. But don't try to put this condition on it. Well, we're okay with the use as long as it's this fellow doing it. Because it might not be that fellow for very long. Stuff happens, things change, and new owners come in. And if you're comfortable with the use, then it shouldn't matter who the owner is. And if the owner is a bad operator, we have other bylaws such as noise bylaw, untidy, unsightly, even animal control, depending on what the nature of the use is, that we can use to deal with those bad operators. The zoning or the use itself shouldn't be the way to deal with that. All right, so it was moved and seconded that the APC recommends to the RDOS board that the application be approved with the following conditions: that the density of the project be significantly lower. Okay, well, nobody knows what that means. Like when, and this was put forward in the context of somebody who wanted to do 1,000 units down in Osoyoos. And so when the APC said significantly lower, okay, well, is that 800 units? Is that 500? Is it 400? Like when does the board or the public or staff or even the applicant know when they've crossed that threshold, right? So it was really poorly defined, and it wasn't helpful. So like when the board was looking at this, it's not that the APC's recommendation was discounted, but it made it very challenging to try to figure out, you know, what would they actually be happy with? And if, I guess my point here is if you're not happy with, like in this case, 1,000 units, then you have to say that, and, you know, send the applicant back to the drawing board if they want to get your approval, right? And, you know, if it's 500 that you want, then you need to say that, and they can work with it. So the fourth one here, which I think is our last one, the owner place a voluntary covenant on his property stating that if, and again, must have been a fellow who was the applicant, if he sells his property, the land will rescind any rezoning changes that were made. So again, it's, as I was saying with that other one, it's an invalid recommendation. And then if the board tried to, well, the board couldn't even do it anyway. It would be an unlawful delegation. So keep in mind what's done by bylaw can only be undone by bylaw, right? And you can't tie a future board's hands by saying that, you know, again, if this fellow sells his property, then the zoning has to disappear. Well, a future board might say, no, we disagree with that. We don't want to change the zoning. And again, why would we want to change the zoning just because one person has sold the property? I mean, again, it should be based on the use, right? So yeah, not a good, not the best kind of recommendation there either. I don't know if you guys had any comments. Unfortunately, there's no. The best training for this is on the job training as APCs and dealing with some of these applications and trying to articulate. Fortunately, you have the benefit of having a day meeting, so staff will be here to assist. And if we see any challenges, or like if we hear the recommendation you're making and we're not quite sure how we're going to be able to interpret that for the board, I think we'll be able to flag it for you and try to get you to clarify. But yeah. Yep.
Okay. So this is going back to that rezoning proposal from the store.
Yep.
And so watching from home and watching the meeting where the APC was asked, and there was no discussion. It was just everyone said, yes, 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 go ahead with the rezoning, which was quite shocking considering the outcry from the community, but nobody asked any questions. And my apologies if someone was on that board. My confusion just rested with, should there have been someone ask some questions, or had that already happened and I missed that part of it? It just seemed to me that they were saying yes to something that the community clearly felt was inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't speak to it, just go ahead and say that, because this is more of a curiosity and
well, I can't speak for it. I mean, and I think that's an issue with any board or a group of people coming together, either as an APC or an RDOS or even a municipal council, right? Like it's difficult to understand. Well, you can't know the thought process. All you can know is what the final vote is, right? And I know with our board, there's no requirement to justify the decision, right? I guess ultimately that time comes at election, right? When you have to stand again. But I don't know if anybody here with experience on the APC wants to speak to some of the considerations when you're having discussions on applications, or.
I think that all those kind of discussions there, when you look at things, you ask what the existing zoning is. And if the existing zoning allows for whatever they're asking for, then you may say, they would probably say, okay, if it's allowed, then allow it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's no obligation to have to ask questions at a meeting. I mean, if you're satisfied with what you've heard from the presentation from the applicant or staff, and you know in your mind it's pretty clear cut, then there is probably no need for questions. But you know, it's an individual choice, right? So.
I think we always ask if there's any further discussion, and if there isn't any, then there isn't any. Hopefully that answers your question.
I'm thinking that there must have been previous discussion or something before that meeting that was shown so that people could see that public. It wasn't a public meeting, but there must have been more to it that just say that I wasn't aware of that came before that. So because that was the only thing. But and I guess I'm asking that question because I felt as someone watching that there was no good reason given for, and is it necessary? Or do you just state your case, state your opinion and?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's not uncommon just for the vote to be called, and I'm thinking more our regular board, and they just go around and count the votes for or against, and that's it. And sometimes there's no discussion, and as Director Gettins was saying too, I mean, the reason why she pulled that pool permit application off of the consent agenda, because the way our board's agenda is structured, the consent agenda, anything that's put on there is, and it's put on there because it's deemed to be non-controversial. It's that everything on that consent is just adopted with one motion, and there's no individual discussion, right? Now, if a director wants to discuss it, they can pull it off. And if there's stuff on a regular board meeting, at least, again, I'm thinking of planning items, there's usually some controversy around them. Either it's a negative recommendation from staff or neighbors have written in and opposed to the development. So the board has to consider all that before it makes a decision. But, it's funny. Sometimes there can be a half-hour discussion on one item, or sometimes it's just, move the motion, call the question, all in favor, and that's it. It's done. So. Each one is on its, well, each one's unique, I suppose, is one way to put it. Okay, so the public information meetings, so with the changes that we've done this year versus last year, so in the previous board term, we generally tried to do public information meetings at the same date or time, or half hour before the APC meeting. And that was more just of a logistical issue. If staff were going to be attending an APC meeting at night anyway, it made a lot of sense for us to try to schedule the public information meeting at the same time, so we weren't doing multiple night meetings over the course of a week or two on the same issue. But just with some of the challenges that we encountered last year with staff turnover and overtime and volumes, we had to take a different approach to our public information meetings. So since I think about June of last year, we have a set time and date for public information meetings. It's once a month. And that's all. That's the only time we're willing to, staff are willing to assist with them. Applicants are more than welcome to schedule their own public information meetings and take on all the responsibility associated with that. And if they do that, they can schedule them anytime they want within certain parameters. Like it's usually Monday to Thursday at some time between 7 and 9 p.m. at night. It can be online, it can be in person, it can be a hybrid, it's up to them. But if they want staff assistance, then it's on the one day a month and it's going to be electronic. And we'll be there to help and whatnot, but that's it. So for the APCs, what that has meant is that I think previously we would have APC members show up the half hour early so they could take in the public information meeting and they could hear the applicant's presentation. They could hear from the public what was being said. And they could also hear staff responses and get a pretty good sense of where the application was, in terms of, I guess, community interest and whatnot, before they themselves met. So that's unlikely to happen anymore. That said, public information meetings will still happen. I can't tell you, because of course it all depends on, when the application comes in, when our set date for the PIM is versus when your next APC meeting is. But you'll find that sometimes the PIM might actually happen before you as a group meet to consider the same item, right? And you're more than welcome to attend the public information meeting and you're more than welcome to participate in it. But when you're at that PIM, you're participating as individuals. You can't show up and say, I'm, Brad from the APC, right? You can just say, I'm whoever, because not that you're trying to carry weight or influence anything, but I mean, really your venue for discussing this as an APC is the APC meeting. You're not to show up at a PIM and say, I'm part of the APC, right? It's just, I think, just a protocol thing. But there may also be times where the PIM happens after you've already seen it as an APC. Again, you're more than welcome to attend, but I don't know how much benefit that will be to you at that point because you've already theoretically passed a recommendation on the application, right? And yeah, if you're interested, and I've got some slides, I think, coming up here. Yeah. So we have all the information about the public information meetings on our web pages. And so so if you want to find out when they're happening, you can monitor our web page, which I'll show you how to do. Or if you haven't signed up for Voyant yet, I think that might be an easier way to monitor what's going on because you'll just receive automatic texts or emails from us telling you what's coming up and when the next meeting is. But if you want to do it through our website, and again, there's other reasons why I would encourage you to visit our website too, which you'll see in the coming slides here. Just go to our main page, which is rdos.bc.ca. And you'll see here, I've got some red arrows pointing to links to follow. So to get to the planning items, you're going to want to select on property and development. And then that'll give you a drop-down menu. And actually, I might send this PowerPoint around to you guys so you all have these directions later. You can select planning, zoning, and subdivision, and that'll take you to this page. And there's a number of different options you can choose from, and I encourage you to explore them all if you want, but probably the key one for you would be the current applications and decisions. So you would click on that link, and it'll take you to a map of all of our electoral areas. And again, you can explore this as much as you want and see what's going on in the other electoral areas. But of course, Area F, it's all alphabetical, so there it is, and you would click on that. And what we have on the following page is all of the current applications for your electoral area. And so that's rezonings, permits, Board of Variance, and we also I can't scroll here, but we also have a list of all the completed applications as well. So if there's anything you're curious about that you've seen in the past and you're wondering, well, whatever happened with that, you should be able to go to this page and find the link for it and see what the final decision of the board was and when that was, and other stuff related to it. So what I've done here is I've just clicked on one of the rezoning applications as an example. And so this is a typical page that'll come up and it'll give you basic information on, what type of application it is, the project number, when we received it, who the applicant is, the civic address, like a really short summary of what it is they're trying to do, and then also who the RDOS contact is. And then the map that's shown here, again, I can't do it because it's a screenshot, but it's interactive. And so it should show you where the property is located. But if that view isn't enough for you, you should be able to scroll on top of it and zoom out to get a better sense of where it is and get your bearings. And then the red arrows here are showing the three main columns that we use when we're populating these pages. So the column at left, the documents, so that should be subject to FOI and privacy, all the application materials that were submitted with the proposal. So the application form, site plans, elevations, professional reports, rationale, sometimes you get petitions, anything that's relevant. And you're not always going to get all of those things with each application, but everything they've given us should be under documents. And we should also have copies of the draft permit and the draft bylaws there. Public consultation. So if you're interested in when the public information meeting is going to happen, that's going to be in the middle column. And we should ideally have dates up there pretty quick, maybe not within the first week or two when the application comes in, but once we've got a sense of whether we have a complete application and we were able to complete our assessment, we'll try to get that public information meeting done, because for rezonings, it is mandatory before we can take it to the board. So the quicker we can get that scheduled and completed, the sooner we can get the application to the board. And then in terms of tracking the progress, that would be under the right-hand column, where you can see the dates at which the board has considered first and second reading, when the public hearing has happened, third reading, etc. So there is actually a lot of information for each application on these pages. And yeah, if you've got our assessment and are kind of curious about certain things, then yeah, you might be able to actually find more information under the documents column where their site plan and some of their other information is contained. Yeah, and this is just an example of some of the typical forms that you'll find linked to these pages. So staff reports, bylaws, site plans, or professional reports. Now I'm going to switch over to permits here, and I'll try to go quick. So just going back to that previous page we were on, so they're usually the second one down in case you want to try to find where they are. You can see here the process steps for a permit are slightly different. The APC, as you recall, for the amendment bylaws, you were what I would consider in the first part of the application process. For development variance permits, you're actually in the latter part of the application process. So a lot of the similar steps when the application comes in, we'll advise the director, we'll assess it for completeness. We'll do our assessment. We'll send out letters to adjacents to let them know that we've received this application, and they can go look at the webpage to see what's being proposed and give us feedback. And then we'll collect all that feedback up along with our staff report and take it to the board. And as with the pool application that you saw, if the board is not comfortable making a decision and wants to have input from the APC, it has the option to defer consideration and send it to you for a recommendation. They also have the ability, which is what I've tried to show here, to either approve the permit or deny the permit. So there are instances where these DVPs come in and you may never see it because either, well, I suppose what's not showing is here is staff could determine it to be minor and approve it under delegation, or the board sees it and makes a decision before getting your input. But as with the pool one today, your input was desired, so they deferred, we send it to you, you give us a recommendation, and we take your recommendation and it goes back to the board for the next available meeting for them to make a decision. So that's kind of how the two, like, you know, a lot of similarities, maybe not as much complexity with a permit versus a rezoning, but the APC's role happens at different times. Now, wrapping up here, so referrals. So we will get Agricultural Land Commission, Crown Land, and a few others. Sometimes the municipalities will send us stuff if there's something happening on a border, right? So if Summerland has a development proposal that is right on the border with Electoral Area F, they might send us a referral and ask for our comments. And on occasion, those could come to the APC, but I think for the most part, the most common one is the ALC. So that's really the only one I'm going to be touching on today. So just some background on the reserve itself, if you're not familiar with it. So it's been with us for over 50 years now. It says VOK. It's not much of Area F, and you can see on the map here where it is located is generally not where you're going to find a lot of people. So it's not high density parts. The reserve is administered provincially. And again, because everything we do is set out by legislation, the legislation says that a local government bylaw, if it's deemed to be inconsistent with the Agricultural Land Commission Act, is of no force and effect. And having said that, though, the Land Commission, just because of staffing issues, they do rely on us to help them a lot, primarily with the building permit process and subdivision process. And also we have more enforcement resources on the ground here than they do. So we do kind of work with them that way in a lot of respects. And there's two types. Farm uses you'll never see because farm uses we can't regulate, but we can regulate what they consider non-farm uses. And so that's usually what the referrals are to us. So some examples here, and again, very common in the south end of the valley, wineries, the retail sales that go with that. Less common, the equestrian centers and the cannabis production. Yeah, we cannot prohibit a farm use, but we can prohibit a non-farm use. And so that's usually what you're going to see. These are some examples, subdivisions, exclusions, wineries trying to do stuff. You got to go? Sure, understand. Oh, other door. So yeah, so just to wrap it up, some key points for the APC, and really I think this is what the Land Commission and the board are curious about. You know, is it consistent with our official community plan? Is it consistent with the board policy? And I think the key point here is that, you know, if it's not, don't authorize it to go forward because it's going to come back at some point. You know, either they're going to need to get a bylaw amendment or some other type of approval from the board to do this non-farm use. And if we don't support it at the Land Commission stage, then we shouldn't really be sending it forward, because if it comes back to us and the commission's approved it, but we were never really on board with it, then that puts us in a potentially tough position. So And so I'm just going to wrap up your projects. I think I've touched on most of these. These are just things that we're doing as a planning department. I think only the last two really touch on Area F. So yeah, for those on the previous APC, you may recall the ESDP amendments that we've been struggling with, I think, for the past 3 or 4 years now. So that's still ongoing. And the Falder zone review is still ongoing too, but we're hoping to get both of these wrapped up this year. And I see I'm way over time. So I'll end there, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me for all of that. And I also appreciate I went over a lot of information, and there's a lot more I could have covered, but there's only so much time in the day, right? So I'll get this slide deck to you as just a reference. And yeah, if you have any questions now, or if stuff comes to mind later that you want clarification on or want to ask questions, email is probably the best, and happy to try to provide a response. And I've got some documents for you all to take away, and looking forward to the next 4 years.
Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to orient me as a newcomer to this committee. So much appreciated.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you guys so
Thanks, Chris and
much.
Shannon. That was really great.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. I forgot there's people online. Thanks for sticking with us as well.
If there's a package to pick up, I am heading into town this afternoon. Do you want to just leave Amanda Dean's at the front desk there and I can grab it before 3 p.m. or?
Yeah, I can do that. I've just pulled it out.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Great. All right.
See you guys
Well,
next
that
month.
said, you guys gonna, I guess we're still technically in meeting. You got to pass a motion to adjourn, or?
Yes, we do. Are we supposed to do election of a chair, vice chair, and secretary?
Yeah, well, I noticed that wasn't put on the agenda.
It's on this.
Oh, is it on the back there? Okay. I know, I will say it's not uncommon for APCs to defer that. So if you want to do that now, or if you want to defer it to your next meeting, it's up to you. I do have a lot of documents to hand
Yeah,
out.
I
so-
think we'll defer it to the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
So if there's no other discussion, we'll adjourn the meeting at 1:31.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody.
I do have one question though. Is this being recorded so somebody can do the minutes, or?
Yep. Yeah, because you guys are during the day, staff have committed that we'll help these daytime APCs with all that kind of stuff. So minutes and setting up the WebEx and all that. So yeah, we'll take care of it for you, and we'll try to get it circulated soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. All right.
Thanks, all.
Well, thanks everybody online. I'm going to exit the meeting.